What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Glass Note podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Wilbur, founder of the Coaches site. Our producer is Justin Kwan. Really excited for you to check out my conversation with Tara Slone, the longtime co-host of Rogers Hometown Hockey, and somebody who brings a diverse and unique view on the sport and the current culture of hockey. Quick note that some of the topics we dive into today may be sensitive, and I also suspect that some in our audience may have different opinions. And I just want to say that we encourage your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. We just ask that you do it in a respectful way, because healthy conversation is how we're going to move our game forward and create a more supportive and environment for our kids that are playing it today. So with that, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Tara Slone. Tara, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So if I give you a time machine and an unlimited budget on StubHub, what group or artist are you going to go back and see?
Led Zeppelin #1. No, like zero question. I would have liked to have seen AC/DC with Bon Scott. I've seen them in their current incarnation. I've never seen the Pretenders. I mean, they're still playing, so I don't need a time machine, but I have to go find them. And I saw Bowie twice, but
No way.
I would have loved to have seen him more. Yeah. In the early days.
Amazing. I understand that as a child, you had aspirations to be a opera singer. And if I had read that you wanted to be a rock star, you lived it. But I think everybody at some point in their youth has those aspirations. But why an opera singer?
You know, I love all kinds of music, and I loved classical music. I took ballet. I remember having this record because I had listened to vinyl when I was a kid, and it had like famous snippets from well-known classical pieces, and I loved it. I listened to it all the time. And I think when I started to sing in choirs as a kid, I found out quickly that I had the type of voice that lent itself to classical singing. And so I sang in choirs all through school and eventually took voice lessons. And I had a soprano range, and I really liked it and had an aptitude for it. And that's what I studied into university until everything went to shit. And I realized how much actual work it was. I mean, it has to be one of the hardest disciplines because your body is your instrument.
I was just going to say, yeah.
Yeah, you can't slack, you really have to put in the time. So I got to university and things quickly fell apart, but that's okay.
When you've traveled around the country with hometown hockey and you meet these young people who have a deep passion for our sport, and perhaps you look back at your own passion that you would have had for music as a young person, is there something to be said where at the end of the day, every kid's going to find their calling? That calling is going to be their classroom. That's going to have a profound impact on how they view the world, their perception of what's going on around them, and that these passions that young people gravitate towards, they matter.
They absolutely do. I think one thing that always sticks out to me, though, is I have not talked to one elite level hockey player who doesn't stress the importance of A, fun, and B, mixing things up. So, while I think it's great, if you have a natural focus, awesome. I really did. But I also listened to rock and roll music, and I also, I did other things. And I think there's so much emphasis now on year-round hockey or year-round specializing in whatever. And I think we can't lose that. And I think that the fun and the mixing things up can only serve to enhance, what your primary driver is. But, no matter what comes, because most people are not going to become a professional hockey player. All of those lessons that you learn throughout the course of your life, so many of them are incredible and transferable. So it's all to be embraced.
It's interesting. I have that conversation with people a lot where they stress the importance of fun. I think the majority of people can recognize that year-round hockey, or frankly doing anything 365, probably isn't a great recipe for long-term success. But have you sort of gleaned any insights as to how we sort of maybe got down this road? Because as much as this conversation continues to be had, it still seems like we're still leaning towards just jumping into the deep end and really focusing on that 1% that even at that stage may or may not make it.
I mean, I think, we've gone down this path because, I mean, those are, I guess, that is what coaches tend to be looking for at the higher levels. And yes, of course, like when you're that much better trained and skilled, um, you are going to ascend the ranks in this way. I just think the bottom line is what's lost is how few how few kids get there and how damaging it could potentially be. Like, listen, don't get me wrong. Like, I have every reason to believe that Connor McDavid, that was his fun. Like, I don't think
Oh
he
yeah.
thought about anything else. And I do think there are kids that are like that. But if I'm a parent, I'm just really thinking, okay, I mean, do I need, to put my kid in this prep school and make that their sole focus, or do I want a better rounded individual? I mean, it's a hard decision to make because if those opportunities are available and you think, yeah, maybe they've got a shot or even a shot at college, I understand, but you have to look at the person as a whole and what's best for them.
You know what? It's interesting. Like early on in my coaching career, I was in Trail, British Columbia, and a couple years after that in Castlegar Junior B. So it's this little tiny pocket of our country in the West Kootenays, and so this is like the early 2000s. And at the time, the West Kootenays had per capita the most players in the NHL of anywhere on the planet. Granted, this is like, these were statistics that were probably put together at a coffee shop somewhere in Trail. So I don't know how much validity, but I think we did have quite a few players at the time. And but my point is, like, I look back on that now and I'm like, man, like that'll never happen again. Like, it's just, if you're
Mm.
not in a major city, and when you're traveling around to more of these rural communities, and do you sense that are we losing that connection with sort of small town hockey, because that really seems to be that, like, that was the glue or fabric of our sport for a long
Mhm.
time, certainly when I grew up.
For sure. I mean, I think in some ways, yes. Like the more kids are sort of forced to go to major centers to play AAA, etc., then sure they become dissuaded from playing in their smaller towns, and these programs start to diminish. Definitely see a lot in girls hockey. The just not having anything available, although that was probably always the case.
Yeah.
Definitely always the case. Yeah, again, it goes back to fun. Like, do you want to, you want to spend your life driving, 4 hours a day, or do you want to play a little bit of pond hockey too? Like, it's just a different time, right? Like, hometown hockey was so filled with these beautiful nostalgic stories, and I think things just they aren't the same. And it's too bad. But there are a lot of advantages to how the game and how organizations have evolved. So.
No, they have for sure. And I always recall like watching the show and being drawn back into the fact that, there was a time where, as a young person, you represented your community. And that was one of the unique parts of playing hockey or any sport, is that you got to wear a logo on your chest that represented where you were from, and you got to compete against kids, regardless of the level you were playing at. But you were afforded that opportunity. And now it seems like that, kids maybe miss out on that. And I get concerned sometimes that,
Mhm.
man, you've got these young people that are, bouncing around all over the place. And we're at the end of the day. I mean, I think we know that, the majority of kids all end up in beer leagues, which is great. But that sense of community is really, really important. How did you, how did hometown hockey become an opportunity for you?
Well, so I know that on paper, it looks like a very strange turn of events in terms of my career
Yeah.
trajectory. So, Like, how does a rock and roll singer make it to a national NHL broadcast? But I think, like a lot of people in sports broadcasting, I just loved it growing up. Hockey never presented itself to me as a sport I could play. In Wolfville, Nova Scotia, as we skated around the rink there at Acadia, like, I mean, I didn't ever see a girl in hockey skates ever.
Really?
So, but like, many Canadians, hockey night in Canada was my ritual, and particularly with my dad, we were Habs fans. My family's from Montreal. That was our bonding time. That was the time that I could swear. I was allowed to swear legally in my house,
Legally, yeah.
legally.
Yeah.
Um, and it just became one of those beautiful things. And so I became very attached uh, to hockey, and was a lifelong fan. And even when I was in Joydrop, I was one of Michael Landsberg's regular guests on Off the Record. So
No way.
I probably did about 25 episodes. And I give Michael a lot of credit for helping propel me towards television when I decided to make a career shift. So it was always in my consciousness. But certainly never did I dream that I would become a hockey broadcaster. But when I did decide to move from music to television, I started in entertainment at a small station in Toronto. I moved on to host a morning show in Calgary, and it was through there that I met the contacts. I was the host of Breakfast Television. Breakfast Television is on City TV. City TV is owned by Rogers. Rogers owns Sportsnet. Blah 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 blah. But I remember distinctly, the when Rogers secured the NHL deal,
Yeah.
there was a press release that came across all of our desks, and it said, you know, there's a new show coming. It's called Hometown Hockey. It's going to traverse Canada and tell stories of hockey in local communities. Ron MacLean's going to be the host. And so for me, I was already starting to try to turn my career towards sport, but that was like a bell went off because, I'm not an analyst.
Yeah.
Rinkside didn't particularly appeal to me as a path, but storytelling has always been what I loved. And so to me, learning about the country, learning about people, telling their stories, and that in conjunction with hockey, that was it for me. So I threw my hat into the ring. I wrote a letter to Scott Moore, who was the president of Sportsnet at the time, and I said, "Pick me," and he did.
Where'd the storytelling come from?
I don't know. I mean, I think as a musician, that's what you're always trying to do. You're weaving tales and trying to transport people and yourself. I went to theater school. That's about storytelling too. Um, I don't know. Like, my parents are smart, creative people, but it's just I love people. I love interaction. I'm curious. I like just trying to leech all the information I can out of them. And probably I would give Breakfast Television a lot of credit too, because doing a show like that, you touch on it all. And I found everything so compelling, honestly, like from gardening segments to fashion to politics. I was really interested in everything.
Well, you know what's interesting? It's like, we predominantly have conversations with coaches, but one of the things I've come to appreciate so much is that the best coaches in our game, all come from various backgrounds, but the one thing that they are all so skilled in is storytelling, and just that the power of that to bring people together and to align people around a common cause. And I think it's also funny, just when you described your first foray into the media, it sounds very much like a coaching career, in terms of bouncing around and trying to find your footing. When you were going through that process, like, how did you, because I imagine it's also like coaching, you don't know where that's going to go. It's a bit of a leap of faith. It's not like you take a course and it's the path is clear. How did you equip yourself and give yourself perhaps those reps or the experience necessary to forge that career?
I think, good fortune in some ways. I mean, obviously every opportunity I was afforded came to me because of the sum of my parts. So, all those things mattered,
Yeah.
my classical music study, my years on the road doing rock and roll, my time in theater school, like all of that. Um, but I think it was, I've had very, very good luck. I lucked out and found a station, a tiny little station in Toronto where I could learn on the job. And Paul Schmidt, who hired me, just had enough faith that I could do this, that he let me he gave me the job and let me learn on the job. So, but also with that, like I threw my hat into the ring. I think that has been part of why doors have opened, is because I knock on them. I've never been shy about taking the chance, and that's where Michael Landsberg came in. I thought, okay, I'm going to try TV, and he helped me make my first demo reel. So, but yeah, if I hadn't have written that letter to Scott Moore, he never would have known that I wanted to travel around the country with a show like Hometown Hockey. So I think that's been a big eye opener for me. It's like, if you don't, the worst thing somebody can say is no. So you got to take the chance.
Do you still have the letter?
Yep, sitting on my computer.
No way. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. So I mean, you read this press release or email goes out, you read it, you obviously you're attracted to the opportunity, but did that vision that you had for what that might be, how did that align with what it ended up becoming?
Nobody knew what that show was going to be. And my role evolved tremendously. When I started the first season, I did half the dates and I was still hosting breakfast television. So
Oh,
that just,
wow.
that messed me right up. So I did most of the Western dates and some other sort of flagship shows. I didn't, I was like, it was like, put me in, coach. I was up for whatever, being immersed in the community, but mostly my role was a little bit more peripheral as a reporter. Jennifer Bottle and I kind of shared those duties.
Yeah.
The second year, I think that they realized that they needed a full-time ambassador, somebody who could carry, from week to week, some continuity. And so they brought me on full time, but I was still mostly just a reporter, although things were starting to grow for me. And there was more concentration on me being in the community and shooting stories that, that weren't necessarily even hockey related, but Tara does something in the community. And then I think it was year 3 where it was just like, okay, here's your seat beside Ron. And that's that.
That's amazing. And so when you were going to those situations, and I guess looking for those stories, did they present themselves? Was it a project of you doing, a little bit of digging? Because I mean, that's I mean, many of them were very, very personal to the subjects you were speaking to.
I would say that, I mean, Hometown Hockey honestly was the most collaborative effort I have ever been a part of. From, we had an incredible team of producers, the features team, they were the ones sort of sourcing those sort of more human interest stories. But we had people out in the community, more on the corporate side, and the people in the community itself, local organizers. We always ask them, what do we need to know? Like, what do we need to know in order to represent your community properly? What are you proud of? So when you're in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, there's no way I would have known that cranberry farming is a growing industry there, but
Who knew?
they told us. And so that's what we did. So we depended a lot on local information. And that's why it was also really important, to get my feet on the ground earlier. Ron, especially when we aired on Sundays, like he had such a short amount of time to be in these places. So it was really important that the crew and myself were on the ground a little bit earlier. So we would pick up stories all the time. Like, our show was never finalized until the last second. And I literally mean that.
No kidding. No
Oh
kidding.
yeah. It was a scramble.
Well, you know what? So I think during the pandemic, a lot of people, at least, I conversations with friends, that one thing it forced us to do is when you did have you were allowed, I guess, to travel. A lot of it was domestically, and you sort of uncovered that there was, parts of this country that you hadn't seen before, and you kind of gained a new appreciation for it. Just throughout your travels, is there any parts of the country that sort of maybe stood out to you, or that you would recommend to people that, man, you got to get out here and check this place out?
I say completely sincerely that, we were surprised everywhere we went, because there was always something magical, whether it was the landscape, and of course, Canada's just so stunning,
Yeah,
or just incredible people, warmth, stories. So, I always hesitate to single anybody out. But of course, like, Ron and I always talk about the stops that were hosted by First Nations. We were in Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta and Peguis First Nation in Manitoba. Those were very special to us. But I would say, in general, our interactions with Indigenous communities across Canada were real learning experiences for all of us. We realized, I think, how massively uneducated or undereducated
yeah,
we and probably most of us had been and were, and how much more learning we had to do. And so we experienced so much generosity with, chiefs and councils and community members just willing to include us in ceremony and teach
that's
us, like,
amazing.
really, really selflessly. But like, we just, I got stories, there's so
Yeah,
many beautiful parts of the country. I think for me, obviously growing up in Nova Scotia, anywhere in Atlantic Canada was really special for me, because it always just felt like a homecoming. Um, and but I learned about Vancouver Island as another. I mean, it's different, but I think the ocean is always what gets me.
coaches ask me all the time how they can get more accomplished during their practice. My answer: huddle. Here's why. Because the more you can teach and educate off the ice, the more progress you can make on the ice. Huddle is the leading video and data solution for ice hockey in the world. Huddle delivers simple yet powerful video review tools with desktop and mobile apps, enabling entire teams to review, study, and share video anywhere and at any time. Plus, with Huddle Assist, you can quickly get access to a full suite of game stats along with your film breakdown, so you can analyze both your team's and individual player performance, ensuring you provide objective feedback. Right now, listeners of the Glassnote podcast can get a great discount on Huddle products. To learn more, check out huddle.com/, the coaches site, for details on this exclusive offer. That's HUDL.com/, the coaches site. You know what? You talk about the experience with the going to the reserves and speaking with the Indigenous community. Um, what role can sport or hockey play? Not only in perhaps um, building more community in those areas, but also just in educating people that need to be educated, and in a sense, kind of building that bridge. And part of the reason I bring it up, I can recall coaching the BCHL, and there was a time, pre-internet, where when it was time to go sign the new recruits, you literally had they called them cards. You had to go get a card signed. So everybody get these cards. It was a mad dash to the airport, and you'd fly out. And I can remember we were looking to sign this player named Brent Gardapi, out of Saskatchewan, and I had to go meet with him at his home on a reserve, and it was new, right? Like, I never would
Hmm.
have had that experience without hockey, and as a I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit intimidated driving out there. But just that experience of going to his home, breaking bread with his family, that's like so invaluable, just to go through that, and really does shape your perception. So, how important can hockey or sports be in bridging some of these gaps that we have in society?
Oh, massively so. I mean, I think, first of all, from my perspective, storytelling, I think you just have to be really intentional about including stories from all Canadians, and that means you include Indigenous communities in that storytelling, and a rich hockey history,
Yeah,
from coast to coast. So that's one thing, but also, yeah, I mean, I think you have to get out of your comfort zone and sometimes just be intentional about making invitations, making sure that, even if you feel shy or weird, you reach out to the community. You make sure that, you're educated, about residential schools. You make sure, I think just
Yeah,
that whole piece of it is really important, and understanding the history in Canada. But I think it's really about just going out of your comfort zone and reaching out, and I think you'll be surprised that, again, the generosity that we experienced. It was never like, why don't you know this? It's like, no, we want to tell you what our experiences have been. And sometimes Indigenous communities are left out of conversations where they should very much be involved.
agree. You mentioned, being intentional. So, Leah Hextall spoke at our conference last June, and
Fantastic.
yeah, and shared her experience, and that was a term that we have to be intentional in who we bring into organization, and I think that we've seen this off season, and again, I'm always quick to point, like, things can always be better, but I think we also have to recognize when there's progress being made, and I think that hockey has taken a step forward in terms of who they've brought into their organizations, particularly at the NHL level. There's female AGMs, females on the coaching side, and player personnel. Um, how valuable is that for young women to be able to go into a rink and see people that look like them, and the possibilities that opens up?
I mean, I just think of myself as a little girl, and there were no women's sports broadcasters. There were no women wearing hockey skates. There was no
Yeah,
Olympic program. Um, I mean, it's become a cliche, but I think it's so true. If you can see it, you can be it. I just, in my mind's eye, I see, a little girl or whatever, like a person of color looking on TV and seeing, somebody in the broadcast booth who looks like them. And that's all it takes. Like, oh, if they can do that, I can do that. And so it's massively important. But, I loved, I mean, gosh, Leah, like, how brave is she? And
unbelievable.
I,
Yeah,
I saw what she went through last year. And yeah, I mean, if you never give people outside the box the opportunity, they will never have the opportunity. And it will become this just, perpetual cycle of othering. And it just cannot remain this way. So I love that we're seeing, these women AGMs in hockey. Um, I love that, I think you talk to Corey Chevery, like, there are women who are really close to entering the coaching ranks,
yes.
um, behind the bench, in the NHL. So we're close, but yeah, there's still work to do. I'm actually part of a program which I think is very forward thinking, and you may already know about this, but Troy Dunville, with the Maritime Junior Hockey League, has started a program
No.
a mentorship program, to work with women specifically in scouting and other roles within that league, with the intention of having at least 10 women placed with teams, I think this year, and then eventually all. So I'd love to see more stuff like that.
No kidding. So in that, like, what's your role in that type of organization?
That was just a mentorship role.
Yeah.
I think he talked to a lot of women in hockey. Like, is this a good idea? Do you think this can work? And all of us were like, yes, yes, do it, do it. And how come nobody else is doing it? So just, I spoke to women who are part of the program, and I'll just sort of hop on and make myself available. I think that's, I think mentorship is not just giving one talk to people.
Yeah.
It's making sure that your inbox is open to these people afterwards too.
Well, I'm gonna try and I'm gonna be cautious about how I phrase this, but I look at our sport, and I look at the climate that we're in right now, And throughout the last 6 months, I've wondered a lot that if some of the transgressions that have occurred, if young males had grown up in a sport where women were around, where women were in leadership positions, would they perhaps be less likely to view women as objects and make better decisions? And I
Yes.
think, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, and again, I think that there's so many good and right reasons for us to start being more intentional. But I think that, you and I had connected on LinkedIn, and you had posted something about, with Hockey Canada. And it was, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but effectively, like, we can't just change the leadership and expect that, things are going to change. We got to roll up our sleeves and get into the trenches here and really figure out, like, this is a systemic issue, and we got to figure out where the root causes are. But that was one that I've really come back to, is that, we've got to support, we've got to surround young men and make sure it's really clear to them that women are their equals. And clearly the culture that we have today is not accomplishing that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, there's almost nothing to add to that. Like that's, and it applies to women. Yes. Cause I mean, that's really the dialogue we're having with Hockey Canada specifically, but it extends to people of color. It extends to people with disabilities. It extends to, I mean, basically, I think we've just unfortunately created a really insular culture. And there are those who get along just fine within it. But I do think some of the byproducts are, well, exclusion, misogyny, silence, and unfortunately, we're seeing violence and sexualized violence. So it's a really big issue. And I think, yeah, I mean, just to oversimplify, perhaps just having diverse thought, having diversity of appearance and experience, um, will just, it's not a magic, everything's going to change, but that will change the dynamic of everything.
For sure. And one thing that you also said is you touched on a culture of secrecy, and I really, I thought on that. And I'll tell you what, one thing that's interesting is, you know I'm not sure how healthy social media is for our world, but I think it is helpful in the sense that reading the comments and just, and if you can do so and be open minded, and understand that people have different viewpoints on these things. But I made that comment and somebody pushed back on the whole secrecy thing, and I thought, that's interesting. Like, what is secrecy, and what is that? I kept coming back to the fact that we, particularly in minor hockey, we sort of lean towards, okay, like, the door to the dressing room needs to be shut, and that this is this private place, and what happens in the dressing room can't leave the dressing room, and that was instilled in me as a young person. I'll be the first to put my hand up um, that was an attitude or belief system that I had when I first got into coaching, was that this needed to become this sacred place. And I kept coming back
Mhm.
to, like, man, can you imagine if we did that in our schools? If we said, no, 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 parents, no parents are allowed. What happens in this classroom is, that's only our business, and you can't be informed. And so again, I just bring that up because I think that's one that it forced me to really look in the mirror and recognize that, probably unintentionally, a lot of us do subscribe to that belief.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's some element of confusing secrecy and loyalty, like you can only be loyal if you protect the whole at all costs. And I
Yeah.
just simply think that's not true. And as we've seen, it's been incredibly dangerous. And we're seeing that in sport in general. And I think in Canada, there's a big reckoning happening, and continuing to unfold. But we, I mean, if you just think about the Brad Aldrich, the Kyle Beach
Chicago
situation
Blackhawks.
in
Yeah.
Chicago. I mean, it's just that's exactly what happened, right? It
Oh,
just you didn't nobody wanted to rock the boat, because it just wasn't seen as being a loyal thing to do, could be disruptive, could be distracting. And look at how people were hurt, you know, irreparably.
Oh man. So I always fear when I hear stories like that. There's probably for every one of these stories that makes its way into the public. There's probably so much more beneath the surface. But in that case in particular, you spoke out, and I don't know if it was scripted or if this is something that you did off the cuff. But a couple of years ago, I had a chance to interview Sheldon Kennedy, and he brought up a term that I hadn't heard before, and that was he said we need to empower the bystander.
Hmm.
And after he explained that to me, that just made so much sense because I think particularly for young people, I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent. I mean, if sometimes you can tell your kid the sky is blue and they don't, it goes in one ear and out the other. Like they need to hear it from their peers. And I think that that's really important in our sport. We have to create environments where kids hold each other accountable. But in this particular case, you were that empowered bystander. And I would say, as much as there was finger pointing, that you were the first person to call it out. And I just look at, from a professional standpoint, like what was your mindset when you were going through that? I mean, you had to have wrestled with that, I would think, internally a little bit.
I did. I found myself getting upset regularly. And I mean, I brought this up in that, whatever you want to call it, monologue. It wasn't
Yeah.
scripted like a monologue, but it felt like that, I guess. All of these things kept happening that I felt like, what is the sport that I love so much that keeps doing these and allowing these things to happen? And, for me, and I know a lot of people take exception to this, is when Logan Mailloux was drafted in the first round by Montreal. I thought, what the hell? Like, you know, this, and a lot of people say, well, he paid his penance, he blah, blah, blah. But Montreal made the choice to draft a guy who had distributed sexual images without a woman's consent. They made that decision to make him a first round draft pick. When George Floyd was murdered and every other sports league was really definitive about their reaction to anti-racism, I don't even think the NHL used the word racism. Like there were just so many, I just found myself disappointed, and I want to be a fan so desperately, but I just felt like I was getting knocked down. And I was disappointed in May of last year when the Kyle Beach story — he wasn't known as Kyle Beach then, he was
Yeah.
John Doe — when that story first emerged, how little traction it got. Nobody's —
Yeah.
it just, again, it was, and I think media, we are complicit in this culture of silence as well. And so I just felt like I had been, I tried to love hockey. I try to love hockey. We try on hometown hockey for 8 seasons to tell the best feel good stories, the stuff that will warm your heart. But like, I just felt like I kept getting knocked down. And it was that day that Gary Bettman did his press conference after the Kyle Beach interview, and it felt so hollow and so heartless and so untrue. It just there was no empathy, there was
Not like a
no
deposition.
compassion. Yeah, it was awful to
Yeah.
me. And it was a day that we had a Chicago game on hometown hockey. We were in Belleville, Ontario. And so there was, for me, there was no choice but to tackle this head on. And I had a crew, and I include Ron in that, who trusted me and knew, I made it clear it was my editorial opinion. It was nobody else's opinion. But nobody asked me for notes. Nobody asked to vet what I was going to say. Um, Ron, he is really good at creating space, and he trusted me, and my producer, Allison Redmond, trusted me. So they just let me talk. And I obviously in my mind had bullet points of kind of what I was going to touch upon, but I wasn't sure I was going to be so eloquent in stating it. Um, and so I said what I said, and I got a lot of support, but of course there are tons of detractors, and I'm sure I'm not Gary Bettman's favorite person. I'm going to guess. So I know that there were people in the league who didn't like it, but I didn't want to be one of those media members who were complicit in perpetuating this culture. I want to see it better because I love the game, and I know that there are so many people out there who feel the same. So I felt like I was giving voice to that group.
No, absolutely. And I think one thing that's really important to point out here is that, like you, Tara, I mean, I love the game. It's given me everything in my life. I didn't come close to playing in the National Hockey League, but I don't sense I'm any less passionate because of it. But like anything else, it can be better. And I get concerned sometimes that when people like yourself speak out or anybody speaks out, that the narrative becomes, oh, you don't think our game is good, or you don't think it's a good environment for kids. And it's like, no, hold on a second, time out. That's not what we're saying. We're saying this is like any other, fraction of society, that there's room for improvement, and that we can't be blinded because we're afraid of our own insecurities, that as a sport, and that we're going to be putting our hand up and say that we're weak in some way, or that we don't have total control on what's going on in our rinks.
Yeah, I've been shocked by how defensive people are. It's never been a personal indictment. I'm never pointing fingers and saying you did this, you're wrong. But I think there are two things. It's like, if you're not part of the problem, then look around and help to improve it. We all want to make it better. But for those who simply don't see a problem, well, that is the problem. If that makes any sense, I mean, you saw the commentary on my LinkedIn page. There are
Yeah.
people who simply did not have the experience that we're talking about and don't believe it to be true. And that's a real issue, because that means that people are not looking outside of their own experience and they're not listening. Like, all you have to do is really listen and tune in. And because there are enough people like saying, like Akeem Aliu, like, people out there who are saying, like, this was my experience. Listen to me. There are people who are literally ignoring it. And that's a real problem. And I think that is sort of what has happened with Hockey Canada.
Well, it's so funny you say that, because some of the individuals that chimed into that commentary, they've done the same to me. And one issue was in particular is I posted a video of Steve Kerr, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, speaking out after the Uvalde shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the feedback, I'm like, how could you possibly confuse this with that? How could you just not breathe even and have some empathy? And so, but I've had, a lot of my friends, most of whom never played hockey, and, what I do for a living is quite foreign to them. And, they've asked me, they said, the stuff with what's going on with their sport and the noise. And I think just, frankly, it's sport in general. There's
It is.
clearly
It really is.
some issues here, but they've said, does any of this surprise you? And my answer is no. Like, it's not. We've created an environment now with kids, and again, uh, predominantly male, where from as if they have any kind of talent, they are recruited from the ages of 7 to 8 to play on specialized teams. We take them out of their home at increasingly younger ages, so they're not under the supervision of their parents, and at an age where young people are all trying to figure out their sexuality, we kind of put them in a no holds barred environment, and then we just step back because our only focus is on winning hockey games, and then we get surprised when we don't get we don't get, I guess, the results that we'd like to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think, education. I mean, aside from, yeah, there's the culture itself has to shift. And it's it's a tectonic shift.
Yeah.
It's big. But I people like Sheldon Kennedy, people like Brock McGillis. I see Brock out there doing a lot of work. For people who don't know, Brock McGillis was, I guess, the first out pro hockey player
Yeah.
who does a ton of work and advocacy in the LGBTQ plus community. So I saw that he did something with Hockey Calgary. I see him with CHL teams. I think what's really key as we start to figure out how to do this and bring in the education piece and the training, like Sheldon's talking about, is it's really got to be in person because
That's it. It's really interesting. That's a great
yeah,
point. Yeah.
I just think I did. Brady Leavold has a podcast. I'm sure you know who Brady is, but
Yeah.
Brady had a long and winding road with hockey and addiction issues, and has come out the other side. And is a mental health advocate. But he talked about, sitting and falling like it was nap time when these videos would come on in the locker room, right?
Yeah.
Okay, kid, okay, guys, here's a video about consent. It's a video. There's no way to attach like a person to it. I think it's to personalize things makes things so much more powerful. And it was nap time. So these things don't get through. So it's going to require a lot of work. And I think the due diligence has to be done, with real human beings.
I think that's such a great point, and I would add, just as you talk about Brady, and I dating myself, but I coached against him, and then recognized him as a really good hockey player, and then when he sort of came back, or his story was shared, I was like, holy smokes! And in your mind, you're like, how could that happen? And it's like, well, he's a human being. That can happen to any human being. But
Mhm.
I would say we have to give people like Brady the space also to put their hand up and say that they made mistakes, and that, hey, they want to educate other people. Because I get concerned sometimes that maybe we're just going to blacklist people, and those stories are of people learning from their faults. So I think that's where we can make some real change.
Absolutely. That's Hockey Canada, case in point. Like to dig your heels in for that long and not acknowledge that you made a mistake. I mean, it's just what are we modeling? From the
Oh,
top down.
no, listen, 1,000%, 1,000%. But I think it's been, what I do feel like I'm not going to I'm trying to use my words carefully here because I don't want to say silver lining, but I think the fact that, independently, a lot of organizations and the provincial governing bodies have kind of stepped up and pushed back a little bit, particularly in how funds are being diverted and used is a really positive step. And I hope what the result of all of this is we're going to stop taking less things for granted, and
Mhm.
people, especially adults in the room, are going to start asking some questions and say like, hey, how come the door is closed there? Or, hey, where does this money go? Or, what sort of conversations are we having with our kids to prepare them for these? Listen, a lot of these incidents that are coming up, these are situations that every young person is going to find themselves in, regardless if they play hockey or not. And I think we just need to do a better job to equip them with the skills to make some good decisions. So,
Mhm.
what I did mean to ask you: at what point did you feel like you had a voice, that you were in a position to start speaking out against some of the things that you were observing?
I do think it was hometown hockey mostly. I mean, I've never been shy to use my voice to some extent, and I've certainly gotten burned. I've been reprimanded. I've had opportunities revoked, um, and I think I've done that my whole life. Like I think I just when I see something that I feel is unjust, I tend to spout off about it. Um, but I think hometown hockey, first of all, it gave me a platform. I think it was a really unique show in that, we were able to tackle social justice issues through storytelling. And so, it certainly became passionate and personal for me. And I felt like, I have reached a certain point of, uh, you know, in my profession. I have a very privileged position. I'm a white, cisgendered, straight woman with a lot of Twitter followers. And at the time, again, I had a very trusting place of work that let me do that. I mean, I have to give Sportsnet a lot of credit. They certainly read my tweets, and I never got my wrist slapped for that kind of stuff. So even though they are an NHL rights holder, they let me do that. So there's a lot of privilege that comes with it, but obviously, I it doesn't come without consequence for me. Um, I get a lot back on social media, and it's been a rough month, but I don't dish it unless I know I can take it. I mean, there's some things that nobody should ever have to take, right? There's no, the clapback that women in particular get on social media is inexcusable. It's filled with hate and sexual violence, and it's awful. So I don't deserve that, and nobody deserves that. And despite what my opinion may be, I don't deserve that. So, um, but I do my best to protect myself. I'll delete the apps when I need some space. Um, and I know that the people who are trolling me are sad, sad human beings. So.
Well, I will say this. I think it's really important. Again, we touched on the talk that Leah Hextall did for us, and man, like I think just the fact that, and she didn't just share it; she screen
Mhm.
grabbed the DMs and put them on the screen. And I mean, what is fortunately for us, we're trying to make our audience at that event a lot more diverse, but it is predominantly males. But I mean, man, she had a lineup of middle aged men coming up and saying, "Hey, like if I had heard it, I may have lost it, but the fact that I saw it." It really showcased just kind of what's out there, and I think that it humanized it, which is really, really important. Um,
Yeah.
you
That's the
recently,
right audience. Sorry, not to cut you off, but and that's the right audience, right? Like
it
I
is
can
right,
speak,
yeah.
I
I
can
think
speak to a room full of my female peers, and we all nod and go like, yeah. But it's not news to any of us. So I love that Leah came to you for that, and I love that you amplified that, because that's who we need to be talking to. So.
no, listen, a million percent, and like everybody in that room, every male in that room had their eyes open because again, it wasn't out of ignorance. It's just we didn't know, and we needed to know. So um, you recently, speaking of social media, you made some comments regarding Don Cherry, and I don't think I don't know how much there is to be gained from like kind of going down that rabbit hole,
Mhm.
but people um, do say things that they may regret. And it's funny, I came across this quote recently. Barack Obama was on a podcast, Pod Save America, and he said, sometimes people just want to not feel like they're walking on eggshells, and they want some acknowledgement that life is messy and that all of us at any given moment may say things the wrong way or make mistakes. And I thought that was poignant, and I bring that up because I've certainly said things that I regret. But is there something to be learned from perhaps the interaction where it's okay to just say sorry and allow things to move on? And because the reaction and the whole communicate, I found it really shocking, and I was like, holy shit, are we still here? Like, have we not moved on from this and recognized that there was a better way, and that the language that was used on TV, granted, there's an expiration date, but let's draw the line and move on from it. That just wasn't okay.
I mean, yes, I think so. And what I tweeted out was born of my frustration that we are still having this discourse, or that's probably too gentle a word, but that we're still having this fight, and that people are still. It's not even just indignant about it. That people are still like uh, just waving their flags and yelling and screaming and stomping their feet. And so, listen, uh, I knew that I was going to get feedback about this. I didn't know that a major newspaper chain was going to take it and run with it. Um, I thought it was really interesting and ironic that the the dialogue was, who is she to be saying this, yet they made it a national story. Certainly didn't need to be. um, I just again, I'm trying to not ignite the shitstorm that was, because it was a pretty unpleasant few weeks following that. Though I don't regret saying it. This, I didn't have an opportunity 3 years ago when this happened to say anything. So I just think that, um, beware of false idols.
Well,
And I think we should be looking to better role models. I don't, I think we need to leave that one alone. And I do not like how maligned my good friend Ron MacLean has been in all of this, and so the whole thing just makes me shake my head.
well, I'll just, from again personal experience. So like like every kid, Dawn was in my living room, and it was a national icon. There's like no two ways about it. But I can always remember my mom would get infuriated the way he would talk about, Europeans being soft and all that. And I always be like, Mom, it's doesn't matter. You don't understand. You don't get it's hockey. And then I became a dad.
Mm,
And then that changes everything, because you're like, what's the dialogue that you want your kid ingesting, and just recognizing that those words are really, really powerful, especially when they're broadcast on national TV. And I think that, through all of this, we have to recognize that, words aren't just words; they matter. And when we put weight behind them, when we broadcast or we write about them in the paper, that I just think we have to be really cautious of the impact that has on young people, because certainly the lens that I saw them through then as a teenager, is a lot different than they are now. And in the same way that, like it's the same thing with fighting in hockey. Like we used to think it
mhm.
was cool to have 16-year-old kids fight in front of 5,000 people who paid money to watch that. And it doesn't mean we need to go back and slap people on the wrist, but it does mean that we can evolve and understand that there's a better way to do things today, and learn from it. So anyways,
Yeah,
not to
I
put
can
you on the
see.
spot there, but
No, no, it's fine. I mean, I was trying to make myself clear without,
yeah,
again, going down in flames yet again. But yeah, I think I like the word evolve, because I think a lot. I mean, listen, I grew up watching Coach's Corner. Of course, we all did. And there was a time in your life where you're like, haha, he
yeah,
called Alexei Ponikarovsky Pocahontas. That's funny. We know better now,
yeah, yeah.
right? We know better. And you're right. Like, all you have to do is look at what happened with Kanye West. And I'm certainly not elevating Don to that position, but like what he ignited through his anti-Semitic words, it's dangerous, and it can be insidious and still dangerous. And so you're right. I think these narratives that unfortunately were perpetuated for quite a long time, really start to embed themselves, and they embed themselves in hockey culture specifically. And so I think it's all related and it's all intertwined. And again, we need to do better. We need to know better. And but mostly, I just want to see my friend Ron treated better too.
Well, hey, so speaking of Ron, I feel like every Canadian feels like they know Ron.
Hmm.
But you do know Ron. You got to hang out with him a lot. Like,
Yeah.
what give us a Ron MacLean story.
Oh gosh.
And
I mean,
I mean, what an amazing! I would say first off, just when you make that transition, like what an amazing coach. Like I met, I mean,
mhm.
in hindsight, looking back, would there have been a better person to ride shotgun with, and through that experience?
And I'll just say, I learned from him by example. He believed in me before I believed in myself. That chair was open to me because of him, and because he believed I could do it, not because I believed I could do it. And so, I think in terms of a broadcaster, a co-host, a colleague, like there's nobody more generous He wants the story told, and he has insatiable curiosity. And so he also wants to kind of milk the most out of it. And for us, it also meant a lot that we were, we represented these communities properly, that like I would always, I was driven crazy kind of at the beginning because he would mention all of these names in this sort of minutia, like he would give shout outs to like, so-and-so Zamboni driver and
Yeah,
so-and-so
yeah,
who
yeah,
has
yeah.
been with the Minor Hockey Association for 25 years. And
Like it was his
oh,
hometown.
yeah. And
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, I'm telling you the truth. At the beginning, I internally and hopefully not externally, I would roll my eyes and be like, oh God, this is like, here he goes again. But do you know how much it meant to the community? Every single time, we would get somebody coming up to us or a phone call or a text saying, thank you for mentioning my grandfather. That just meant everything. And so, I mean, I certainly learned from him never to take things for granted. There's no name too small. There's no character too small. I mean, in terms of a story, I mean, we were on the road a lot. Lots of fun, lots of late nights. He and I share a deep love for music. So that's
What's
kind
on
of,
what's on Ron's playlist? Like you're driving down the highway. He's got he plugs in his Spotify. What's on the radio?
so he and I both love Tom Petty a lot. So
Okay.
that's sort of our main, bonding language is the language of TP. Um, he right now, because I saw him a few weeks ago, he's really digging Sam Fender.
Right.
He would have probably a lot of what would he have? He definitely pays attention to new music. He'd probably have a lot of Jim Cuddy and Blue Rodeo. He's, good buddies with Jim. But he's got pretty eclectic taste. But the one story I will say, it's not, there's no beginning, middle, and end, but we were in Swift Current the day that David Bowie died. And the night, it was a Sunday night. And I mean, he loves and respects Bowie, but I was, a really insane fan. So he really comforted me that night. I lost my mind. That's the first time I've ever had that, with
Yeah.
a public figure. I don't know. We've had so many. I have to think of like the perfect story to serve up on a platter.
No.
That's not that's safe for work too. It doesn't involve too much alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, like I said, I think it's amazing. And again, I think it all goes back to storytelling, right? Like I think that, Ron is just, brought so many people into the lives of other Canadians. And I think we forget sometimes, like I'm out here on the West Coast, like, the life that we live out here is just so different and unique to other parts of the country. And sometimes I think we all assume that where we're at is where everybody's at, and it's not. So, hey, Tara, this has been fantastic. And, one thing we've come to appreciate through the coaches site is that, at the end of the day, um, you know, um, my words or, the words of our staff may not carry a lot of weight, but what we do have the power to do is to shine a spotlight on people that are speaking up for all the right reasons and trying to make not only our game a better place, but I think our communities and society as general. So really proud to have this conversation today. And thanks for joining us.
Hey, it means a lot to me. So thank you.
The Glass and Out podcast is a The Coaches Site production.